Lewis Hamilton enters the 2020 Formula 1 season as a 6 times champion, but that could have easily been 9 championships if it were not 3 races over 3 different seasons. 2007, 2010 and 2016 were all years in which Hamilton could have become champion, but did not. They are 3 weirdly opposing failures, some where Hamilton is at fault and some where it's out of his control completely. So in today's video we'll go through these 3 years where Hamilton could have become a champion, but of course we all know this is hindsight. Looking back on it is different to what it was at the time, but nonetheless all 3 of them are interesting in their own instance. 2007. Going in to the 2007 Chinese Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton led the championship by 12 points over Fernando Alonso and was 17 points ahead of the eventual champion Kimi Raikkonen in his Ferrari. He was on course to win the championship there and then in China. Even with issues with his tyres, a normal pit stop late on would have seen Lewis Hamilton score enough points to become champion in his rookie season of Formula 1 at the Chinese Grand Prix. But it seems it was not meant to be. Hamilton stayed out on heavily used tyres to try and be aggressive on strategy, but he'd be overtaken by Kimi Raikkonen and then nearly by Fernando Alonso as well before he scurried into the pit lane. Hamilton would carry too much speed going into the left-hand kink, going into pit lane, and end up in the gravel. His used tyres just did not have enough grip to get him through that corner at the speed he was carrying. Desperate attempts from the marshals were in vain. Lewis Hamilton was out of the race as he was stuck deep in the gravel of the pit lane at the Chinese Grand Prix. This would ultimately allow Kimi Raikkonen and Fernando Alonso to go into the final race of the season with a chance of the championship. But Hamilton was still leading, 4 points ahead of Fernando Alonso and 7 ahead of Kimi Raikkonen. And we have to remember back then, you got 10 points for a race win, not the 25 you get here today. So it was still very much in Lewis Hamilton's favour. It seemed like he just needed an average race to secure the title. After bidding it in China, still, we knew everything was possible. You could also argue that Brazil was the race which Hamilton threw away a chance of the championship, but in reality it was car issues rather than a mistake that cost him here. While recovering from a bad start and in 6th place, Hamilton had a gearbox issue. He managed to reset it, but he lost a huge amount of time and dropped down to 18th position. He would have an incredible race and fight back to 7th place, but with Kimi Raikkonen leading on course for the 10 points, Lewis Hamilton needed 5th, as 6th place would only equal him on points with Kimi Raikkonen and he'd lose out on having fewer victories. 7th place was the most that he could do, and while it was a storming drive in Brazil to get points, the reality is losing out on the podium position in China through a combination of team strategy and lack of control in pit lane was the main cause of Hamilton's loss in 2007, which is a massive shame considering he was on course to be a rookie champion, which is somewhat unheard of in most forms of top motorsport. Yes, both of the final 2 races cost him, but it was China where Hamilton was more at fault and in a better position to pick up the points he needed to be champion of 2007. Hamilton had put together one of the greatest F1 rookie seasons in history. Obviously it was aided by having a fantastic car, but the ability to match Fernando Alonso over a season after he'd himself just won back-to-back championships is still quite surreal when you think about it. You can't imagine a rookie coming into Formula 1 nowadays, even if he was put in the best car on the grid, and being able to match Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen, for example, the top drivers of their year. It is, and was, quite an astonishing feat. At the time especially, I was gutted for Hamilton, but possibly it was moments like these where he gained that necessary experience to go on to win a huge amount of races and 6 championships. Obviously Hamilton would have wanted to get the 2007 title, but I definitely feel he learned a lot from the defeat and that feeling he must have gone through after that race. 2010, the Spanish Grand Prix. So the Spanish Grand Prix may have only been the 5th race of the 2010 season, but ultimately it cost Hamilton another championship that year. To give context as to why this race is important, we have to look at the final championship order after Abu Dhabi. Sebastian Vettel, 256 points after not leading the championship all year. Fernando Alonso second place, 252 points. Mark Webber 242 points. And Lewis Hamilton 240 points. Hamilton was only 16 points behind Sebastian Vettel. So let's go back to the Spanish Grand Prix. While this is certainly the most dubious suggestion of a lost championship in this video, Lewis Hamilton lost 18 points for second place at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2010. Those 18 points would have made him champion. Vettel and Alonso were behind Hamilton at the time in Spain as well, meaning they would have got fewer points as well, so he would have won the championship by a few more points than just 2. So Hamilton would have gone up to 258 points, and Vettel and Alonso both would have fewer than their 256 and 252 points respectively. So let's get into the full story here. Lewis Hamilton crossed the line with 2 laps to go behind Mark Webber, who was leading the race. Then, as Lewis Hamilton went through turn 3, he would have a front left tyre failure, apparently caused by a defect in the wheel, causing it to pierce the tyre. He would go straight on into the wall, and the damage would put him out in the spot in the gravel trap. This would take him out of the top 5 in the standings after the Spanish Grand Prix, and obviously cost him the points he needed to become champion later that year. Now, the reason why I say this one is a little more dubious than the rest, because of course if you look at the 2010 season, all of the top runners had at least one sort of big failure at some point, and this possibly was Hamilton's most important. So we look, Vettel's engine blew up when he looked like he was on course for a certain win in Korea. Of course, he already did win the championship back in 2010, but still he could have got more points if his engine didn't blow up there. Alonso's engine went in Malaysia, and Mark Webber had a few avoidable incidents which cost him points as well. But what makes Hamilton's more important to me in this scenario is it happened on the penultimate lap of the race. He was so close to the finish, and you have to wonder what would have happened if he'd just finished that race. He was far enough ahead of the cars behind that they weren't really an issue for him, and he wasn't really that close to Mark Webber to challenge him for the lead, so second place looked almost nailed on. It was just that tyre could not make it that final 2 laps around the Spanish Grand Prix circuit. Nonetheless, we have to remember, just like Kimi Raikkonen in 2005 at Germany, tyre failures of any sort can come at any time. Just very unfortunate for Hamilton that this one came so close to the flag, as those points would have put him into championship winning position, assuming everything else had stayed the same. Yes, I know, that's quite a big assumption. So the final of my 3 here today is 2016 and the Malaysian Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton was on fire this weekend. Okay, that was too easy. Let's go back. Fastest in Q1, fastest in Q2, fastest in Q3, and pole position over Nico Rosberg by 0.4 seconds. It felt like Hamilton's resurgence to the top of the standings was inevitable. Hamilton had just lost the lead in the championship to Rosberg in Singapore, the race before this one in Malaysia. But if Hamilton won and Rosberg didn't finish second, he would take the lead of the championship back from the German. But what did happen in Malaysia was even more extraordinary. In a way, you couldn't even script it. Into turn 1, Rosberg would make contact with Vettel, causing Sebastian to retire and Rosberg to drop right to the back of the field. It still amazes me to this day that no one wiped out Rosberg there. There were so many cars flying around him whilst he was spinning up his tyres and causing smoke. I'm surprised that no one just made a little bit of contact with him. Somehow he survived a moment he would need to eventually win the 2016 championship. Rosberg would fight through. The 2016 Mercedes was a beast, and overtaking the midfield wasn't much of an issue for him. Hamilton was leading and somewhat dominating as the Red Bulls behind battled over second and third positions. It looked certain now that Hamilton would win Malaysia and take the lead of the championship with just a few rounds to go. However, just like the crazy world the Formula 1 is, on lap 41, Hamilton's engine would unceremoniously give way after just crossing the start-finish line down into turn 1. Fire spewed from the back of the car and his chance of a victory was gone. Along with it, the chance of taking the championship lead back from Rosberg, as he had now got into a position where he was scoring points. With 15 laps to go, you assume there was nothing Mercedes could have done, but it was a bitter blow for Lewis Hamilton, who had caught up to Rosberg in the standings after losing a huge amount of points early on in the season. Hamilton DNF'd, Red Bull took a fantastic 1-2 for the team, and Rosberg came back to third place and scored 15 points. A day that looked over for him at turn 1 was actually a day of celebration for Rosberg. 15 points gained on his championship rival, and mentally a big blow for Hamilton as well. Hamilton would end up losing the 2016 championship by 5 points, even after strong tactics in Abu Dhabi where he backed up Rosberg into the following group. Of course, you look back to the Malaysian race, Hamilton would have taken 25 points for the win, Rosberg would have most likely come home in 4th position to score 12 points, and of course, the rest is history there. You'd have seen Rosberg would have been quite far behind Hamilton in the standings if Hamilton had won in Malaysia. As someone who has no bias towards Lewis Hamilton, 2016 does seem to be the one that got away. 2007 was of course gutting, but he was a rookie and mistakes were expected. 2010 was more of a long shot. Of course, the car wasn't quite there throughout the full season as a McLaren driver, but still, the Spanish Grand Prix had went his way. He could have easily been champion. But in 2016, I feel like the car let him down on a numerous amount of occasions, probably more than Rosberg if I'm looking at this completely as a neutral. But nonetheless, he lost 3 championships here. He won't ever get them back. But nonetheless, it's still interesting to look back and see what could have been for Lewis Hamilton. Whatever your opinion on Lewis Hamilton, it's quite amazing to see what he's managed to accomplish in his Formula 1 career so far. He brought the sport mainstream in the UK. We hadn't really had a driver fighting consistently at the front for quite a while at that point, and he now has 6 championships to his name. This video is definitely not having a go at Lewis Hamilton or team mistakes or anything in terms of missing out on a championship. It's just reflecting on 3 occasions, 3 races in particular, where he missed out very narrowly on the championship. After all, this is life and it's impossible to be perfect. I like to think that this video shows that while he does have 6, it could have easily been 9, but it possibly could have been less than 6 as well, if a few things went against him. That's the way life works. You also have to look at the other side of this, however. If he didn't struggle so much with McLaren in 2010 with reliability issues, would he have considered moving on? If he didn't join Mercedes in 2013, he might only still be a one-time champion. Rosberg could have gone on to win 3, 4, 5 championships with Mercedes. Who knows? It's a crazy world, Formula 1, and those micro decisions really mean massive things down the line. We all know that generally one of the 2 drivers in the best team will be the one that wins the championship, but it is fascinating to see how Lewis has managed to put himself in one of those top seats on so many occasions. The Mercedes decision will of course be seen as one of the biggest he made in Formula 1. But let's appreciate how much he pushed them on to become the fantastic team they are. But with the regulation changes, Hamilton coming on board to join Rosberg within the Mercedes team, it all just seemed to work so well in terms of making the team a dominant force within Formula 1. So as we speak, the 2020 season has not started yet, but Lewis does look on course to match Schumacher's 7 titles. Unless the Mercedes car comes out with some big issues once we start up in Austria, or we see Red Bull or Ferrari pulling something special out of the bag, it looks like it's going to be between Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas for the 2020 title. Of course, Hamilton would then go on to 7 titles, but if Bottas wins, he'll get his first title, which would be quite exciting for the sport, even if it is a shorter season and somewhat a weird season. As I just said, it's not going to be a full season like we expect it. I hope that we get 16 to 18 races throughout the year, but even if we don't get the full 22, which we were expecting at the start of the season, I don't feel that's going to discredit the title in any way. In fact, having a shorter season will actually make it harder to win, meaning stuff like DNFs and issues in qualifying will be even more pronounced in terms of points lost throughout the year. Of course, we're starting with a double header in Austria before going to Hungary, then 2 British races before going to Spain, Belgium and Monza. It's going to be an interesting start to the season. I'm hoping a few more European rounds will slot their way into it and we can get maybe a 16 or 18 race season. That would be fantastic. But nonetheless, the double headers are going to be interesting, I think. Whether a team does dominate that whole double back-to-back weekend structure will be interesting to see or not. I think the fact we're starting in Austria, could we possibly see Red Bull leading the standings? It's going to be quite an interesting start to the season, I think. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing what happens early on, especially if Red Bull can get a lead. Verstappen gets a couple of wins in Austria. I think we're going to have a really nice championship battle on our hands here, even if Red Bull aren't particularly the strongest car. Nonetheless, thank you so much for tuning into the video once again. I realise it's been quite a while since I've done a proper video like this, but you might have seen on social media the reason for that, and of course I'll explain further in future videos. But nonetheless, I'd like to see your comments down below. What drivers do you think are going to be going for the championship this year? Is it going to be Hamilton Bottas, Hamilton Verstappen, Hamilton Vettel, Hamilton Leclerc? You're noticing the sort of structure I'm putting in there. It's probably going to be Hamilton and someone. Nonetheless, thank you so much for watching. As always, stay safe and all the best. Goodbye.